to get started and right away invite Simon Masharia for the opening prayers.
Let us bow our head and pray. Almighty Father, this afternoon, we thank you for another gathering in this auditorium. We are grateful that we are gathered here for a very important cause of this university. We are grateful, God Father, for the progress we have made and we will even make today. Thank you, God, for our guests, the panelists that we have in the topic that we are discussing today. We know that, God, you have prepared them, and we believe that, Father, out of this meeting, there will be good knowledge that will have been created. We thank you for the cause of this university, and we pray that, Father, you continue to guide and lead us. We are grateful, God, even because of even the politics of war across the world, Lord. We're thankful that you have helped the world to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and in Russia. We thank you, our Father, that you're going to continue to help the global society, Lord God, to resolve these issues. We thank you and we bless your name, our God. May this university be blessed of you even this afternoon, and all of those who are taking part in this panel discussion, and those who are following online, and those who are present here. We pray that, God, Father, you're going to give us the knowledge that we need for us to be a progressive people. Thank you, Father. We honor and thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much. You may be seated. So it is an opportunity that I want to take to invite all of us to this event. This is a public lecture, one of the many series of public lectures that we are having as KCA University. And today the theme is the geopolitics of oil and gas. Yeah, so just to set us in the right context of the events of this afternoon, we have eminent personalities that have been invited to shed some lights and give us some snippets of knowledge in the area of petroleum geopolitics. Yeah, so without much ado, because time is so much spent already, I would want to invite the DVC Academic Affairs, Professor Joshua Bagaka, to give his welcoming remarks, and at the end of it you will invite the CEO and the Vice Chancellor KCA University. Thank you. Put your hands together for our professor, please.
Thanks, Margaret. Our guests, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Isaiah Wakindiki, the PS, and all the guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Okay, welcome again to KCA University, where action begins. I'm actually very excited about this public lecture because it actually demonstrates that KCA University cares about the things which matter. And again, we are actually very appreciative of the kind of guests we get because they are those people who matter when it comes to the topics we talk about. I think this is a time when this conversation about the geopolitics of oil and gas, this is a time when this topic is very critical. You know, the gas prices in California today is around $7 a gallon. I think that translates to close to 400 shillings a liter. And even in other places like Texas, where they actually mine oil, the prices are still very high. Okay? So you actually wonder the impact of that on the economy, on the other things. And so this is a conversation where we really need to think, especially as a nation, that how do we maximize the benefits of oil for the good of Mwananchi. And I think this conversation is very good. But I'm very excited that this conversation is taking place at KCA University. And I think looking at some of the public lecture series we have had in the past, it actually demonstrates that KCA University cares. And so I want to take this opportunity to invite the host of that university which cares, Professor Isaiah Wakindiki, to come and officially welcome the guests. Prof.
Thank you so much, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and Student Affairs. Distinguished guests and panelists today, and colleagues of KCA fraternity, we are delighted again to gather here this afternoon to participate in what has become a mark of this university, the public lecture series. We are into about the 7th series of the public lecture, where we are addressing topics of public interest to professionals, to politicians, and to even non-practitioners, topics of interest. And today we are discussing about oil and gas. Oil and gas is one main source of energy. I'm a physicist, and we define energy as ability to do work. Meaning, it's like without oil and gas, there is no work. So we hear more from the panelists who are already assembled in the hall, and to take us through this very important, very current topic will be our moderator for the day, Terean Chebet. Terean is a household name in this republic in terms of media and public relations. So without taking much time, I want to invite Terean to take the podium there in the front of us. You will do further introductions of the guests and proceed with the program. Thank you so much indeed. Yep.
Chief Executive Officer, Oil and Energy Services Limited. I'd also like to welcome up on stage Engineer petroleum engineering consultant. Is Michelle here with us? No, Michelle. She's on her way. Okay. Ms. Wanjiku Manyara, CEO, Petroleum Institute for East Africa, who will be joining us virtually. And my name, once again, is Terian Chabet. I am the CEO of Pink Foundry Communications. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for making time to be with us this afternoon. And as we have seen on the news, both locally and internationally, over the last couple of months, when a disruption happens in one part of the world, supplies and prices are impacted across the entire world. And the effects of the Ukraine war have been far-reaching. We've seen the impact of fuel prices locally and how that has triggered inflation and has affected every sector, specifically agriculture and transport, which has been heavily impacted. So I'll quickly introduce my guests and then we'll go into the questions. I'll start with Mr. Mwendia Nyaga. Mwendia Nyaga is a petroleum and energy business leader with 18 years in oil and the energy industry. He is a CEO of Oil and Energy Services. That's a boutique advisory firm providing consultancy services to its clients with interest in energy and upstream petroleum industries across the Eastern Africa region. He's also the CFO of OML Africa Logistics Limited. That's a leading logistics service provider in the petroleum and energy sectors in East Africa. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. P.S. Kamal, I have a feeling we need to move your chair a little bit. Are you able to see him from that side? No. Can we get some assistance to move the chair a little bit?
Move it.
Just this way.
Problem is, you then block.
Yeah, anyway. Is that better on this side? Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. P.S. Kamal was reassigned the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Petroleum and Mining in February 2022. Prior to this, he was the PS for the State Department for Petroleum, a post he had been appointed to by the President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2018. P.S. Kamal's wealth of experience in the energy and mining sector spans over 25 years and has gained, after lengthy engagements with both public and private sectors, development partners, and non-governmental organizations in Africa. So first of all, just first things first, and to set a pace for our conversation this afternoon, the most serious side effect of the Russia-Ukraine war for the world economy is higher commodity prices, as we have seen, both locally and international. Now, while world leaders are very quick to blame the war, how exactly does the war, thousands of miles away from Kenya, impact us as Kenyans? I'll start off with you, Mwendia.
Thank you very much, Terian. I think first let me also thank the KCA University for inviting me here to this forum. The last time I was at this university, I had visited the former Vice Chancellor, and it was exactly on the same subject of oil and gas. And he was trying to lay some base for how KCA can get involved in the oil and gas development in Kenya. So I'm happy to be back to discuss the same subject, albeit from a different point of view. I think I would just mention perhaps maybe just a few factors which then the audience can try to connect to what they're seeing today. Only last week I was listening to President Joe Biden talk about what is causing the increasing prices in the USA. And he mentioned the shipping industry, how in fact his words were like the shipping industry has gone rogue in that since the Russia-Ukraine war started, the shipping industry has increased the shipping prices in orders of magnitude. That basically then means that anything that you import is not only just being affected by that cost of oil and gas, but it's also being affected by the cost of transportation to come to where you are. Yeah. And that's just one. Another factor I would mention is that throughout the year 2021, the gas prices, this is natural gas prices, had been increasing quite significantly. I think like in Europe, they talk about the gas prices having increased like 500%. Now, fertilizer, as we know it, is produced mostly from natural gas. So it is an input to agriculture. And so the prices of fertilizer in Kenya have also gone up like threefold. So agricultural products, therefore, will either be expensive because of the expensive input, or they'll be expensive because some people now don't afford fertilizer, so the production is lower. So some of these things, therefore, and I've just mentioned two, I know we have limited time, but you could mention many other factors that when you connect them, they come back to the shelf in the supermarket where you go to do your shopping.
And still within the issue of the impact, PS, I'll just like to come to you. Is there a way, for a country so far away to escape the geopolitics or the impact of, the UK-Ukraine war on issues like, the oil that we're able to access as a country?
There is nowhere that's far away. That is perception. Everywhere is on the globe. This is a global industry. So to say that you're far away is to fudge things a little bit. It's global. The oil moves all over the place. The fact that Indian petrol, premium motor spirit, is exported to the US should tell you that there is nowhere far away. All that is happening now is that there's a realignment on supply. So where the demand is and where the supply is changing. I'll give you an example. So China buys a lot of Angolan and Nigerian crude oil. All that's going to happen is they don't have a problem buying Russian crude. So they will start buying Russian crude, and whoever was not able to buy Russian crude will start buying Nigerian and Angolan. So there's a realignment. But that's crude oil. As you know, there is also a serious shortage in refining capacity. It's a result of the last, 3 years of very aggressive renewable fuels, anti-fossil fuels business, where there's been almost no investment in refining capacity. And don't forget, there was also COVID. So for the last 2 years, nothing happened. So after COVID, everyone has to come back. We have to rebuild our industries. We have to rebuild our economies. I think Kenya, we are 10% above pre-COVID times in terms of consumption. So because, these investments take between 10 and 15 years to pay back, and there hasn't been any investment. And people are not convinced, the oil industry is not convinced that should they invest, we're not going to go back to saying, well, gas is not a transition fuel, or this transition is actually zero carbon instead of net zero. There's very little investment going on. So for that reason, it's very, very difficult for us to cushion ourselves against the global market.
All right. And I want us to talk about the Kenya discovery of oil in the Lokichar Basin in a moment. But before we get into that, I'd like to invite our guest who has just joined us, Michelle Boyd. Engineer Michelle Boyd, I had mentioned her earlier, is a consultant in petroleum engineering and the founder of Michelle Boyd Foundation, where she mentors young engineers. She's also the board chair of Kenyatta University SPE chapter. She has over 14 years international experience in the oil and gas industry in the USA, UK, and the Africa region. She has worked for BP America Production Company in the USA, Tullow Oil in East Africa, based in Kenya, and Glencore in West and Central Africa, based in Chad. Michelle, a very warm welcome to our conversation this afternoon. Perhaps just very quickly to get your views on the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on, on what's happening locally. What's your take on what's happening?
So since we've already mentioned I'm a petroleum engineer, I like to stick on technology. So I'll leave our very able PS and also Jamaica to add on to politics. But anything when it comes to technology, what has affected technology, what has improved over the years in technology, what are the difference when it comes to technology in the UK, the US, and what's happening in Africa, especially East Africa, because we're a young industry in the East Africa region. Yes, I would like to talk more about that.
Okay. And I know you were involved in a lot in Lokichar with Talo. So when we get to that conversation, I'd like to welcome you,
Thank you.
into the conversation. So let's talk about the Kenya discovery. And I know it came with a lot of excitement over the last couple of years. And something you alluded to earlier, PS, the information is out there, but sometimes as Kenyans, we do not go out to read and find out. So maybe just to take us back, what is the current status of Kenya's oil discovery?
I think we better go back to the beginning, because I am very sure nobody has read about this.
Okay.
And even my mother asks me, so are Talo still in Kenya? Because this is what she reads in the newspaper. You know,
It's unfortunate that the people who inform us don't want to do much work. So Michelle has been there, of course, but I'm going to save her from commenting on it. So basically the way oil exploration works is that you have exploration. So you go to a place like in Kenya, northern Kenya, you start off with seismic. You do seismic studies, find out what's in the ground. It's like taking a photo of what's in the ground. Then the geologists convince the people with the money that it's worth drilling a well. It depends where the well is. The well can be anything from $2 million to $100 million. If you find something, that's called discovery. If you don't find anything, that's exploration. So in the South Lokichar Basin, there were discoveries that were found. So at the discovery phase, you begin to find out, what does this reservoir look like? And I'll leave Michelle to talk more about the reservoir situation. Then if you feel that, this is possibly something that could be financially beneficial to us, you go into the appraisal phase. And we've just finished the appraisal phase now. And in Kenya, according to our constitution, because the minerals belong to the people of Kenya, the contractor, because the oil belongs to us, the oil company is our contractor. They work for us, the people of Kenya, has to then file what is called a field development plan. How do they expect to develop this resource? How much is it going to benefit us? How much are they going to spend? And if we, the ministry and parliament, with the representative of the people, are happy, they approve the field development plan, and then we start. We are the field development plan right now. And that can take anything up to 6 months to get through the legislative process, government, and all these things. So that's where we are now. From exploration to discovery, depending on the availability of infrastructure. If you take the case of Uganda discovered in 2006, they have not started to produce yet. It's 10 years later. We discovered in South Lokichar in 2012, we haven't started producing yet. You will find other places where there are a lot of infrastructure. It can take 3 years, 4 years to get to the production phase. So it all depends where you are. And so it's relative. You can't say that, it has taken us a long time or it has taken us a shorter time to do it. It depends on a lot of other factors that are there. So that's where we are in our process.
Thank you, PS. Nyaga, perhaps you can just come in and tell us from a private sector perspective what the exploration and eventual discovery means for Kenya's private sector. Is it viable for you? Is it a space where, because I remember seeing on Twitter when prices went up, and this is, our regular Kenyans on Twitter were like, but we discovered oil, so why is it that we do not have, backup or, but I guess it does tell us a lot about where the mind of the Kenyan is at when it comes to the status of Kenya's discovery. What does it mean for you as private sector?
Yeah, first the PS has talked about the different phases and also the amount of time that takes. I think Kenya's exploration activity somehow was between 2010, I'm sorry. We discovered in 2012, but then much more exploration activities and what is called appraisal, basically the activity that confirms how much there really is, was happening up to around 2017. During that time, there was a lot of drilling of wells and acquisition of seismic data. Again, that's what PS has talked about, the imaging below the subsurface. And during that time, therefore, there were a lot of people who got involved in the activities. You are either in there providing food, providing accommodation, laundry services, transportation of people, accommodation, or maybe you're providing some logistic services in terms of handling the heavy equipment like drilling rigs and the materials that are being handled in there. A lot of the things that Kenyans got involved in are like those ones which I am mentioning, also carrying out the civil works. When we started doing the work in Turkana, there were really no roads into those locations where the wells are located. You rarely find wells being drilled somewhere near where the main infrastructure system is. You find wells being drilled just somewhere in the bush, in the wilderness. So roads had to be constructed. Well pads where you place the drilling rigs had to be constructed. And those are actual activities which were carried out by Kenyan companies. So private sector gets involved at that level. Then as we perhaps mature, we start getting more involved in more technical activities. People like Michelle were obviously ahead, having been somewhere else where this happened, and so she was a petroleum engineer in the same location. I actually do remember her quite well, taking President Uhuru around the producing facility when we were starting to produce the early oil program. So again, that's involvement of the local people. The next stage, which is what we haven't gotten into, and unfortunately, sometimes after exploration and appraisal, things do come to a standstill. And they could come to a standstill for a very long time as the technical people and the economists try to model these on how do we construct it, how do we produce it. And then they come back, they give the PS, the field development plan, which eventually, when it gets approved, they come back. And they come back with a bigger activity compared to the earlier activity of exploration and appraisal. So what happens at this stage is that they drill many, many more wells, the producing wells now. Some of the exploration wells may be used in production, some of them may not be used in production. So they drill many more wells. Basically meaning there is say like from a logistics point of view, there is much more activity going on. There should be more employment of the local people, both the semi-skilled and skilled personnel. Actually, in oil and gas, we rarely talk of unskilled because you must have some certain level of skill to actually work in there. Even if you're just being trained on how to ensure your own safety in the area, you must undergo some level of training. So during that period where much more money is spent and much more wells are drilled, then above ground facilities are also constructed. So they basically construct an industrial plant to receive the crude oil, clean it, and prepare it to now pump into the pipeline for export, or if you have a refinery nearby, to pump it to the refinery. When that work is going in, then you can imagine how many people are likely to get involved there. Some of the construction stops being oil and gas technical. It becomes basically the normal construction activity going on, but with very strict safety and operation standards. Mm-hmm. So that is a level where then the enterprise person can get involved probably in whatever line that they're in and come into the industry and do some work. Yeah.
You talked about the refinery, Michelle, I want to come to you to talk about technology, both from discovery perspective, but also from a refinery perspective, if you can, because I remember the refinery was also an issue of debate for a while, whether we are remodeling the current facility, which is almost non-existent, or having a shared refinery with the other nearby countries in East Africa. From a technology perspective, what would be needed for us as a new possible oil-producing country to be able to export our oil or refine our oil?
Okay, so the first thing that all of us need to know is technology has really moved ahead. And even though that Kenya discovered oil later on compared to other countries, we can use the newest technology to set ourselves ahead. We don't have to go through the stages that the US have gone through, Dubai has gone through, where they have to discover there are certain drilling bit would work in a certain environment. Like we just use the newest technology, and we have expertise that will just make sure that we're using the best technology and also that is safe and cost effective. And that will mark Kenya to be in a better phase, even though we discover later. When you compare Kenya, now East Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, their gas discovery, you have Sudan, South Sudan, they're ahead of us compared to the production of oil and gas, but they have their own issues. And my own opinion is for us to be successful, we have to come together as East Africa to make sure that we are successful. Because we have Uganda, their discovery is actually at 600 meters, the hydrocarbon. So it's much more cheaper to drill and operate in Uganda compared to Kenya, where we have ours at 3,000 meters. Everything is almost 3 times. Like the rig has to be 3 times bigger. Everything, the tubing, the technology that we're using, the expertise, everything goes up times 3. But the downside that Uganda has is that it's a landlocked. So they don't have anywhere to take their crude oil. So they have to talk either to Tanzania or Uganda to make sure that we work together. But when it comes to, so that's upstream, because oil and gas is divided upstream, midstream, and downstream. When it comes to downstream, now it's all about refinery and getting to the market. We do have Changamwe, the refinery. I visited personally, and Kenya actually was a hub of East Africa. It was way ahead compared to the other countries in East Africa. This Changamwe was operating since the 1960s. When I looked back into the history of it, it's quite exciting. Unfortunately, it's just not operable. And where we've discovered our oil, as the PS has said, it depends the environment of it. How much advanced technology, how much stuff do we have in place? Now, when it comes to Turkana, we have to first fix the road. There's so much infrastructure we have to put in. There's so much capital that you have to put in before even, put in pipeline for it to come to the port. So definitely, it's a process. Do we have oil? Yes, we do have oil. Is it gonna help Kenya? Absolutely, it will. We are just in a phase of just restructuring, and of course, COVID came. A lot of things have come to affect us, but it's definitely an industry that will make an impact in Kenya, and we'll be able to, enjoy whatever comes from it in the economics.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. I have been informed that Wanjiku Manyara is now joining us online. Wanjiku Manyara is the CEO of the Petroleum Institute for East Africa. She's passionate about using her skills in leadership, negotiation, influence, collaboration, rational and logical thinking to positively transform humanity and the environment. Is Wanjiku with us? Not yet, all right. So we will continue with the conversation, and PS, I'll come back to you. With the environmental concerns and shift to cleaner energy sources, will Kenya still be able to derive the full benefits of the discovery? And perhaps, just as an add-on to that question, will this alter the relationships that Kenya has with other countries? And you mentioned geography in the earlier context. So what are your thoughts around the shift to cleaner energy just when we are discovering oil?
Well, let me just give you just some high-level statistics. So, the Kenyan, what we put out as carbon dioxide
into the atmosphere, our carbon footprint, is 1/50th the average American. 1/50th. So cumulatively, the global south, so Africa, Asia, has contributed 3% cumulatively of all greenhouse gases since the beginning of the world. So we're not even a player. In a lot of the time, because of who we are, we're quite big in the region. We think that we're very big everywhere else. We're actually very small. We do not see that we're only going to be producing 80,000 barrels a day. So just to give you an idea, the world consumes 100 million barrels per day. So we're going to produce 80. It's even less than the increment that OPEC are thinking about putting into the world next week. So we are not there. We're not there yet. Yeah. So from that perspective, there is no big issue when it comes to climate change. And don't forget also, Kenya, our power generation is 80% renewables. We are embarked on one of the biggest biofuels project on the continent, which will outweigh anything that we're going to produce from an oil and gas perspective. So from a net zero perspective, it's net zero. It's not zero, it's net zero. We are still in the positive.
Okay. Mwendia, countries in East Africa at various stages of oil development, and Michelle has alluded to Uganda. And there's the issue of authoritarianism, there's the issue of civil strife, as we've seen in many countries across the world where oil specifically is concerned. Is this an issue that Kenyans should be worried about when it comes to what is called the resource curse? Is it something we should be worried about as a country?
For a long time, I wanted to argue that this so-called resource curse is probably just a leadership curse. The resource is what it is. God gave it to us, has put it at our surface, has put the same, perhaps in a bit more abundance in other places. It's not just the leadership that does it. It could be, well, still leadership, but the community leadership can also create a lot of issues. I was laughing, and I think I read this only yesterday, that Nigeria is planning how to increase its production back to 1.8 million barrels per day, not by producing more oil. It's by stopping theft of crude oil. So some people are stealing crude oil from the production systems, and so that is not then counted as Nigeria's production. So I think for me it's a matter of governance, and I think Kenya has, in the last couple of decades, set up quite a lot of laws and other governance systems that might help us not to get exposed to this. And most of all, the oil in Kenya is very, very small compared to the economy and how much money is flowing to the exchequer and being utilized. It's really very, very small to divert a big population to that. This is what now they're looking at, and they're forgetting everything else. In Uganda, it may be slightly different. Well, perhaps not as much, but it's a much smaller economy, and their production is going to be much higher. It is estimated at 230,000 barrels per day. So that as a contributor to the exchequer may be a much bigger number. But I think the issue is governance. That's what needs to be addressed, and continue covering those gaps that may exist.
All right. Because we have government and leadership in the room, and you've talked about the leadership curse. P.S., perhaps you can just tell us in brief, some of the policies or laws that have been put in place to ensure situations such as civil strife do not happen, that, the communities where these discoveries are found are, content with the partnerships. And I know that but you're not with Talo anymore.
No.
Yeah, so maybe you'll not be able to speak to that. But perhaps you can just tell us, what are some of the laws or the policies that have been put in place to ensure this does not happen?
So let me just back up a little bit. I think one of the things that people will say, well, you guys are saying that the discovery is so small. So what are we discussing? What's the point? But Michelle alluded to it and said, look, this place, Turkana, where it is, we've had to do everything. We have to build the infrastructure. We've had to put the electricity in place, the roads. Now, when you build the pipeline, we've talked about Lapset Corridor. People believe that Lapset Corridor was formed to export Kenyan crude oil. We signed the Lapset Corridor Agreement in 2010. Not even there, in 2010.
2010.
Before we discovered any oil. Kenya had an agreement with South Sudan to transport their oil from South Sudan to Lamu. And so Ethiopia was also going to be involved in this project. And nothing happened. Because of course, South Sudan, shortly thereafter in 2013, had their own strife. But since we started talking about this oil that's coming from Turkana, land has been surveyed, it has been gazetted for acquisition, the acquisition of the land is ongoing, the port of Lamu has been built, so all along will be a new road in addition to the pipeline, there'll be new towns, there'll be resort facilities, there'll be a lot of things that will happen along the Lapset corridor. So what are the other things that have happened? In the law, of course, the act has, the Petroleum Act says that we have to share revenues, 70% national government, 20% county government, and 10% the community. So that way, at least the community do get they do get a share. Now, if you remember when we started this thing and Michelle was there, people wanted their share of the money to go to their credit card, And we tried to explain to them the amount of money, if you are to get to your credit card every month, is enough for 3 beers for every adult. But if you all pull together as a community, you can do a lot more. Yeah? And there are many other things. For example, Mwendia alluded to the fact that people who supplied food to the camps, it was a women's group who were growing food for Talo, and they were turning over 5 million shillings per month, which they never had before. When Talo arrived and the joint venture partners arrived in Turkana, they started a whole financial literacy program for women. Because don't forget, people didn't know what a tender was. And when they received the money, they didn't have a bank account of which to receive the money. So how do you tender? How do you open a bank account? Just the whole things that we take for granted. The financial literacy issues. So there are a lot of other benefits that have happened. Also, it's important for leadership to temper expectations. We are not going to see a flood of Ferraris in Lodwar. That's not going to happen. So we need to temper because we see in the movies people who are in oil and gas, they're billionaires, they're millionaires, or whatever it is. It's not the situation. It's not how the world works. So we have to temper those expectations. And if we temper those expectations, you have less of the problems. I'll give you an example. People say we want cheap oil. Norway is one of the largest producers of oil and gas in the world. Their fuel prices are maybe twice Kenya. But they have decided to invest their revenues in their sovereign wealth fund. And in their sovereign wealth fund, they own a lot of industries, who then, that money is intact. It doesn't come to distort the economy. They take that money from the endowment, from the revenues that they get from their investments, and that's what goes into the economy. So we have to think about it like that. But let's not be narrow in the way we think that we're going to have free fuel. Yeah, we can have free fuel, but there are many other ways to do it. And so Kenya has set up a sovereign wealth fund, which is awaiting assent in Parliament, to go through Parliament. And then there is where we need to put in the governance structures on how we spend the money that we get from the fuel as a national government, and how does it go? For example, Dubai, all of us have been to Dubai. Today, Dubai and Abu Dhabi's income as a country, the oil and gas is only 5%, because they've put their money into investments and not given it just as free fuel. So we really have to consider these things long term. Kenya is here for a long time. We don't just want to go to have a party, and this is where the oil comes in. The money arrives unexpected or expectedly, but it's so much that we just spend it, and then the oil gets finished. Because don't forget, the oil will get finished in 15, 20 years in those fields. And then what do you do after that? Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. Do we have Wanjiko on the line? Not yet. All right, just to let you all know, we'll be opening up to some questions from the floor. So as you listen to the conversation going on up here, please feel free to write it down somewhere, and in a couple of minutes we'll come back so that we can open up this this conversation.
I think, Diane, you should ask Michelle about her experience in Chad.
Yes, please share with us your experience in Chad.
So I got an opportunity to work in Chad, and then that's another good thing about oil and gas. You're really exposed internationally. You're able to work in different countries, work with different people from different backgrounds, and you also work in different projects. My experience in Chad was, first of all, our contractors were Chinese. All of the contractors are Chinese, and we have all the supervisors were from either Canada and me from Kenya, and then we have all the local people who are Chadians, but they all speak French. So my first experience when I was going to lead the first meeting, I found out that there's language barrier. However much everybody has a lot of technology, there's language barrier. So our Chinese will tell us the operations of what's going on, and then we have somebody who has to translate from China to English, then from us English to Chad. So something very simple like a 10-minute meeting can take up to 1 hour. But the funny part is when the Chinese people crack a joke, they laugh, then us in English, we have to wait, then laugh. Then by the time it gets to French, it's already watered down. But we were operating in a very insecure field, very insecure, to a point where we had Boko Haram. I mean, the security was just red completely. And it just gave me a different perspective of how we have it so good in Kenya. Because over there, everywhere I was moving, or any expert was moving, had to move with military. So however much they had so much oil than Kenya, and they were actually in production, there were other things that were hindering the production of oil and gas, which was the high security operation costs. They had advanced so much. They had 2 facilities that was producing oil, so they were a step ahead of us. And they were also landlocked, which Uganda can learn some few things from them. So their pipeline was from Chad to Cameroon. But this insecurity was just on another level. They have to import even food. To be honest, some of this food, I wasn't sure what I was eating. Yes, it was just, they have to import everything. I remember when I was flying out, I was working schedule of 1 month on, 1 month off. So you can imagine working for 1 month, you're very ready to go home. And when we got to the airport, the entire facility was shut down because it was operated in France. So however much you want to operate, that's why they cannot get really high quality contractors to work there because of just the environment. However much there is so much oil, however much there is so much they can do, there are other factors that actually affect the industry.
Wow. Michelle, I also just want to stay with you from a case study perspective. Given where Kenya is currently, in its oil journey, whether it's from a technology perspective or otherwise, are there case studies that you can, that we can borrow from? Perhaps countries that you've worked with technologies that you have worked with that Kenya should be looking at this phase that we're in.
So I'll pick two of the technology. One of them is the type of grease that we use for greasing the valves. So we discovered that we're using just regular grease that we use in the cars, but actually there's a specific grease that you use in oil and gas because it helps out. Remember, whenever we are producing the oil and gas, we have natural pressure that is pushing the hydrocarbons. When we're producing oil, water, and gas. So with time, it wears down the valve. So if you put regular grease, it's very light. And then with time, you start seeing that gas is leaking. And it's because we're just using a very light and probably not the appropriate grease. And these are some of the things also, I was taking it to ownership to sanitize the citizens of Kenya, because these are things that you can pick up. Who is going to be supplying us with grease? Maybe that's an entrepreneur can be able to pick up and supply grease. So that will be one of them. And also, another case study is about you always hear that our oil is waxy. So one thing I always wanted to tell people is wax does not mean our oil quality is low. It's just by nature it has wax. Our quality of oil is measured in API, and our quality of oil is very high when you compare it to other places that are producing oil. It's just that because we have oil that is waxy, it means that all our facilities, including the pipeline, has to have some kind of heating capacity to make sure that we do not operate at a temperature that will form the wax. Because by nature, we have wax in the crude oil. So many times, everybody keeps on saying, oh, we have oil, we have wax, it's not a good thing. We have wax, there are other places that produce oil that has wax, in Oman. So you just find a way how to operate and how to learn how to deal with the wax. It can be done in different ways. Either you separate on the site or you just transport it and just make sure the temperature is higher to a point where the wax appearance does not occur. So those are the two cases I would like to share that will probably help.
All right, you've mentioned something, and I'm just curious about the opportunities that are available for entrepreneurs within the sector. Wendia, we can start off with you. In light of the discovery.
Yeah, a lot of work has been done around this. And I remember some 3 concentric circles that appeared in very many meetings when the development was being discussed, where you start on the outer circle, which has stuff that every business needs or every activity needs. For example, if you just come down to paper, pens, stationery, then you build on that. You have water, you have food, accommodation, and many other things that generally any operation like this, whether oil and gas or in any other sector, is going to require. And those were also sometimes called indirect services, because they are not so directly being needed to come and to be brought in just because there is this industry. Is the same person near the area who is supplying meat to everybody else in the community can also find an opportunity here to supply. There was the middle circle, which contained what was called direct services. And these were services which are called direct because Without them, the operation may not continue. You talk about, I talked about civil works, for example. There's a lot of civil construction that will be done in this area. And so you will need somebody with the knowledge and experience to carry out the level of work that's required. There are also transportation services, especially when it comes to the heavy equipment and the materials required in the field. It stops being just the normal transportation. You need some level of skill to do that. You go to the lifting services, maybe, the operations of cranes for lifting of heavy equipment. Sometimes, like when they come to the construction phase, when they're building the central processing units, there'll be some fairly heavy pieces of equipment that would come in modular form, and they'll need to be lifted so that they are fitted at the right place. Those are the kind of direct services I'll talk about. I'm sure the other panelists can help add to that list. But then somewhere in the core, you have the circle that has the highly technical services. And those are the kind of services which, even when you start to talk about local content, it is not where you can start. We're talking about the person who is providing the drilling rig and operating the drilling operations. You're talking about the person who is, after the well is drilled, there's somebody else who comes in and goes in there to do what they simply call completion. I don't know why it's called completion, but it's quite some technical work that goes in there to prepare the well for the production, install all the little tools and the equipment that you need down in the well to be able to control production. You can shut it down if you want. You can basically manipulate what's going out there, maybe on a computer. So that's a highly technical service. You come to the construction of the production facilities themselves. This is like what I said is an industrial area. You will need some contractor who somehow understands how this thing is done. Even quoting for that job itself is going to be quite a tough thing, not just counting the nuts and bolts, but also understanding the other equipment that are required there and knowing where to get them and stuff like that. So you look at these opportunities in those three levels. And even when we are then talking about local content policy, we try to look at a policy which would allocate the outer circle of indirect to local, and in fact, even going to the local area where you want to involve these people. You don't want to start shipping spinach from so far away if it can be produced somewhere near there. Then you come to the middle level also, which you also start saying that it should really be for local business people, and if they are really not able, let them themselves go and partner with someone international who is able, so that there can be technology and capacity transfer to come and do this. But the very much inner circle, you have to say that at this stage when we are starting, perhaps it could still be either very technical, or financially it could also be require so much funds, such that if you try to look for that money and you're not doing this in any other place, maybe you may not even get funded, because you'll be asked, when you're done after the 3 years of drilling, where will you take the drilling rig? Utaipeleka wapi? Will you have paid up the money? So you need somebody who is drilling here, drilling another place, and many other places. Of course, this capacity also gets built with time as this happens. And perhaps as I finish, I would maybe mention something that's happening in Uganda right now, because Uganda is starting the development. Work is going on the ground. I had actually visited there 2 weeks ago. And what Uganda did, using these same three circles, apparently they are used not just in Kenya, you'll find them in many places. Well, they ring-fenced some of these services and put it in law. In 2016, they developed the National Content Policy, which then led to national content regulations. And they put it in law, and they listed some 16 services, which they said, these must be performed by Ugandans. So they were told, but Ugandans don't have the capacity to do this. They said, yes, but what they don't have the capacity, they're going to go and look for somebody to work with. And so you'll see that Ugandans are now partnering on some of these, like I think like medical services, for example. Remote site medical services is again not just the same thing that we see, because you have to mobilize everything, you have to be able to move with the crews where they're going. It's not like a fixed hospital somewhere. So you find that that is ring-fenced for Ugandan companies. But Ugandan companies have to go out and find somebody who has actually done this before. But they do the partnering because they are medics in Uganda. What they don't have is this specific knowledge of how do we operationalize this activity. You'll find things like logistics, things like civil works, you'll find it's Ugandan companies who are doing this. But most of them have gone out and gotten partners to come in. We're trying to encourage them to pick some of the partners from Kenya. But, you talk about the spirit of East Africa community, they say, no, national content is Ugandan content.
Wow.
It has to be looked at as that. Yeah.
PS, I want to wrap you into that conversation on the legislative support framework. To what extent has the Kenyan government put in place laws and regulations that will govern specifically prospecting rights in the country? And I know we briefly had a chat about the mystery around the PSCs, and you said it actually is not. It's not a mystery. If anybody wants to find out more information about the production sharing contracts, they're actually available online. Just tell us a little bit about that. And please feel free to tell us that we do not like to read as Kenyans.
So if you go to, I'm always told that, I keep telling people that Google is your friend. Yeah. It's free, by the way. If you go and just download the Petroleum Act, the production sharing contract is an annexure to the Petroleum Act. Just go and read it. Everything that you need to know about Kenya's production sharing contract is in the Act. Yeah, because we needed to make it a standardized document. And what may be different is where are you drilling? Like Michelle alluded to, if you are opening up a whole new basin that nobody has ever drilled there, of course you want more incentives. If you're going somewhere where oil has already been found, or there has been some kind of data that has been acquired, of course we'll want to gain more as a government. So those are the only things that will change. But Mwendia is being very modest, because Mwendia is in this business. And the one thing that the problem with this local content, if you want to move away from, because by the way, the money is made the closer you get to the wellhead. But the more loss you can make, the closer you get to the wellhead. I remember there was a rig operator who came to drill a well in 2013. And they were told, we are going to drill 11 wells. They came, they drilled 2 wells. The joint venture partner said, there's an economic downturn, we're not drilling any more wells. They just spent $48 million on a rig. It was one of the best rigs we had seen. It was a walking rig, where it can move itself from one well to another well. You don't need, the services of Mwendia to dismantle the rig and move it to the next place. So that's it, too bad. You have to then find another work for that project. So the nature of the exploration is cyclical. It's boom and bust. You'll come, you'll drill 10 wells, you better find a job after that, where you're going to take your investment, whether it's rig moving, plant operator, pipe supplier, drill pipe supplier, chemical supplier. You have to be really on your feet to know where I'm going to find another contract. I think one of the things that Kenya has done very well, forget about downstream, is 100% Kenya. So there is no need even to legislate that. The expertise is well known. Everybody from the pump mechanic to the CEO, I think it's 99.99% Kenyan. The other business, which I find quite interesting, is on the upstream and closer to the wellhead, Kenyans are taking the risk and partnering with companies, but they own the equipment. So they will partner with some of the big operators and go to different countries. Because otherwise this equipment is very, very expensive. But one thing that I would like us to do in Kenya is, once we start going, is to allow Kenyan companies to import equipment. Because right now what happens is the contractor, everyone imports the equipment on the name of the contractor. Once the contractor finishes their job, you have to re-export your equipment because it's imported tax-free. What I'd like to see is for us to allow local contractors to import specialized equipment and store it in country. That is probably the next step that we need to do. The other thing that you will find, and Michelle alluded to this, is that at the operator level, we Kenyans don't want to be in difficult places. We want a job in Nairobi. We want a job in Mombasa. We want somewhere where things are easy. But the nature of oil is that it doesn't seem to want to be in Kileleshwa. It just does not want to do that. I don't know why. So you have to go to all these places out there. And what are the jobs? Plant operators, but just general plant operators, people who build bulldozers, who drive bulldozers, people who operate cranes, people who, any form of earth-moving equipment. We just don't have those people here. Young people don't want those jobs. Or should I say their parents don't want them doing those jobs. Because, I mean, to say, what does your child do? Oh, my child is a welder, my child is an electrician, plumber, earth mover, bulldozer driver. We don't want those things. But I can tell you there is a worldwide shortage of plant maintenance people, plant operators. The wind farm in Turkana, we had to import crane operators. Wendy will tell you, to put those turbines on the mast, those wind turbines. We just don't have those people here. And yet everyone says there are no jobs. The jobs are there, it's just that and for a local content perspective, that is low-hanging fruit. The Philippines, today if you want people to come in and man your oil operation, they'll most likely come from the Philippines. The Philippines have decided they're going to be the TVET country in the world, the TVET supplier. Here we're happy with our 3 billion shillings, $3 billion remittance. Philippines has doubled our population. Their diaspora remittance is at 23 billion a year. So, look, we need to get more serious. Forget about the big picture. I'm going to supply an oil rig. That is just one part. But there are so many other things that come under local content that we don't even see them.
Michelle, globally, and of course from the conversations that you've talked to us about Chad and the hardship environment that the PS has just mentioned, clearly the industry is a hardship industry or operated in a hardship environment. But, you know, in light of gender equality, how do we get more women into the pipeline? You know, and pipeline meaning the general pipeline within the HR or, you know, staffing in oil companies. Perhaps you can tell us that in light with what you're doing with the Michelle Boyd Foundation?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the industry definitely is male-dominated, but we also encourage, if your talent is in science, where else do you need to be? So when I joined the oil and gas industry, definitely we were few, but to be honest, all through from the government leadership to my boss to my mentors, I've found out that even though things are not in place, especially when I'm working in the field, I found that things are not done intentionally to make the environment tough for me. It's just that it doesn't come automatically in their heads that I am the only female in the group and I need my own bathroom. There are other things that I need in the environment that will help me to do my best at work. So I discovered when I speak, it's implemented. So I've learned, even though I'm the only female in the team, and if I see something is not appropriate or the environment is not appropriate to make my work easy, is to just speak. And that's why I keep on encouraging the young engineers. When you see something is not in place for you. The young engineers, they're more in technology. You just speak, and things will be easier. So the environment can be really harsh, and for me, it's not about the gender, it's for both. Because when you're working 28-28, that's 28 days on and 28 days off. Or maybe you're working offshore. It's for both genders, because you are away from your family. What happens to family life balance when you're away for 28 days, for a whole month? What happens if you're the engineer on duty? You work very long taxing hours, from 12 hours to 18 hours. In fact, even when I'm sleeping, I have to have a break in the oil and gas industry. When it comes to the foundation oil and gas, when I moved back to Kenya, I found there was a really big gap between definitely understanding the industry. So I took it as an initiative that it is my duty not only to come and serve, at that time, tallow in the industry, I have to also make sure that the citizens understand this oil and gas industry. Because you will tend to just listen to what's happening in the media and probably just brush it off, or just, try not to understand. So I took it into my docket to make sure that like in this forum right now, we are able to speak out to the citizens for them to understand this industry. So that when you can see how you can plug in, you have to plug in as an entrepreneur, you have to plug in as a young engineer, you have to plug in as a leader, you'll be able to have some first-hand information to make the right decision. And also is to reach out to the youth, not only just in college, but also in primary and high school, for people to understand what is engineering, what is petroleum engineering, what is it all about. And that's why with the foundation, we reach out to the youth, to the high school students, to the college students, to talk about oil and gas, and just to do mentorship, and to encourage girls into STEM. Because if I use my story and tell you what are the good things, what are the bad things, you're able to make a decision. But that's what we do in our foundation.
All right, thank you so much. Michelle, P.S., we do have a government that's pro-gender. We've seen it in the 30% set aside for tenders, in leadership as well. Perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about what policies that the Kenyan government can put in place to ensure or to create opportunities that are attractive for women to get into the petroleum sector.
I think one of the things is what Michelle has said. You can't legislate everything. Yeah? Even if I tell you must go into a certain industry, you know nothing about it, you will never go into that industry. I think we just have to make sure that we encourage people to go to school and learn those things, the sciences, for example, engineering. For example, I can tell you that Kenya Pipeline Company have a welding school, and you'll be surprised that half the students are women. Yeah. But it's not, they've understood that it's not an industry where you have to use muscle. Today everything is automated. It's about your skill.
Yeah.
Yeah. But unless you know about it, you'll never get into it, no matter how much the government legislates and puts together. So it's through these kind of forums that people can learn what it is that we're looking for. I'm not a big believer in legislating things. Look, if you look at the downstream industry, we've not legislated anything, yet it's 99% Kenyan, to the point where we export to our neighboring countries our skills. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'd like to open it up now to questions from our audience. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. Do we have a microphone for? Yes, we do. Okay. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself and who you would like to respond to your question.
Anzal Ali. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon
to everyone. And first of all, I just wanted to respond to Mr. Pierce. I don't remember his name. And the same way we get encouraged, or the same way you guys are encouraging the younger ones, or the same way we are encouraging the younger ones to study hard and get, like, I mean, you become someone in this life. It should be the same way that we are supposed to encourage people, or the younger ones, with the kazi ya mkono. I mean, and here in Kenya, we are having in Turkana, there is that oil and gas farm, right? If at least we could have that point of view that it's not a must for us to have a white-collar job. I mean, I'm doing IT, I'm in the IT sector, but if I get someone who is elder than me, at least to tell me that, Anzal, you're supposed to do this and this, so that at least you'll be able to help there are some small things that you know, they will end up helping the rest. The same way right now we are hiring people, or we are getting lots of loans from China just to get the road. Those are engineers. It's not that they didn't go to school. Yes, they did. Let's say they did. The same way we are in school right now, and we are having young engineers who are coming up. That should be the same way that we are encouraging our younger ones to become engineers who will not fear to do the kazi ya mkono part. That is one. And the other question is, I don't remember who asked this, but the other question is, the same way right now oil and gas prices are going high, do you guys think that in the coming years, if it goes on like this, do you think that businesses will die, entrepreneurs will just end up staying at home? Do you think that medics will not be having the chances to go maybe abroad, or maybe patients from Kenya should go abroad? Because, I mean, without energy, there is no life. Without oil and gas, there is no transportation. Do you think that we will go back to old age and use carts and camels? I mean, do you guys think that we will be using camels and carts to go places, or do you have a solution for it? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you ask a very valid question. You know, what's the worst case scenario? If it continues like this, are we going back to camels and perhaps mkokotenis to get to work? Mundia, would you like to respond? Yes.
Let me start with that. Okay. You know, it's a good thing that we're at KCA. You know, technical, vocational training. Accounting is a vocational skill. What do BCom students do in the evening? They go and learn accounting. What do engineering students do in the evening? They have maybe a student center, I don't know. They don't go to they don't go to the polytechnic to become auto mechanics. They don't go to become electricians, how to wire a house. They don't do those things. Yet, BCom are doing accounting, which is a vocational skill. You know, this thing is about perspective. For some reason, and Michelle will tell you she's an engineer, engineers believe they're elite.
Yes, yeah.
They're not going to become watu wa mkono. Yet, that's where you start. That's how you start getting a job. That's how you get into the industry. You become a plant operator, plant mechanic. To spend less for more. Conservation is probably the way to go, and this is where we need to, as universities, research these things. For the first time, we're going back to biofuels. Remember in the old days, you guys, some of you are so young, you won't remember. We used to have gasohol, where we used to blend ethanol with petrol. Now we're going there's a pilot scheme going on in Makueni where 19,000 farmers are growing castor for biodiesel. It's a pilot on 12,000 hectares. And by 2025, we're going to convert our refinery in Mombasa into a biodiesel and sustainable aviation fuel plant on 260,000 hectares of growing croton, castor, and other biofuels. I saw even Total said they want to get into the biofuels business.
We are human beings. We are resilient. There is no problem that we cannot solve. You are in a university. This is where you come to solve the world's issues. You identify the problem and you solve them. That's the job of everybody, including engineers. This is what engineers do. They see a problem and they solve it. Yeah, so I'm not too concerned about going back to carts and camels, unless you want to corner the camel market, but I don't see us going back that way.
Thank you, P.S. Mundia.
You know, in the decade that ended in 2010, there was some people in the world who came with a theory called peak oil. And the peak oil theory was saying that by around 2010, the world will reach what you would call peak production. At that time, we were not even producing 90 million barrels per day. It was slightly less. I think it was 88 million barrels per day. And they were saying that would be the peak production that you can reach given whatever oil resources are there in the world. And after that, it may stay there for some time, and then it will start to decline. Because even if you are finding more oil, you're also depleting the old fields. So it will reach a point in that theory where the rate of depletion will be higher than the rate of finding more oil. And it was interesting that the characteristics of what will happen was defined exactly the way the young lady has put it here. That in fact, somebody even said, we will go back to Stone Age. Because oil at that stage was still providing, and it still does even today, a very large proportion of the total energy supply for the modern world. And so it was not easy to fathom what then will happen if it gets there. Apparently that debate is part of what got the oil prices around 2008 to go as high as $140 per barrel. It became very expensive. But we passed there. Now, I think people are starting to see that. People then discovered there was perhaps so much more oil that can still be discovered. But that said, the oil industry still does operate in cycles. And the PS mentioned about the boom and bust. Because what happens is, when the price of oil is high, people go all out to look for new oil wherever it is, because it gives a very large economic opportunity for making profits. And so they go and they find it and they develop it, and when that production starts to come on stream, we go into a different cycle, because now the rules of supply and demand will kick in. And I think in the last number of decades, people have even estimated this to be around 7 years, 7 years, 7 years of boom, 7 years of bust. And the last cycle even led to what they called the Shale Revolution in the US. The prices were high enough to incentivize business people to develop technology that could produce oil that was never thought possible to produce previously. So in the shale is basically just a very tight reservoir where even when you drill a well, the oil does not flow to the well. So they came up with technologies where they could even fracture these rocks to enable the oil to flow. And I know I'm entering into Michelle's domain.
No, you're all right. I'm doing a good job.
Anyway. So they would fracture, and I think some of you may have read about hydraulic fracturing. And they would fracture the rocks and enable the oil and then gas also to start coming through. A revolution that kind of peaked momentum completely in the late 2000s. The world did not see this coming. All the other large oil producers did not see what the US is doing is going to cause a revolution. And by around 2010, US was suddenly producing so much oil compared to what anybody had ever thought about. People thought US had run out of its oil and gas. It was on the decline and has to rely on the Middle East and Russia for forever. So by around 2014, this production hit a certain level that the world now had oversupply. And the prices started to decline. When the prices started to decline, then investment also started to decline because there is not as much incentive to invest in this. By around 2019, it started becoming that there was oversupply of oil. Discussions started taking place in OPEC, let's reduce production now so that we can sustain higher prices. And as that was going on, Saudi Arabia said, wait a minute, when I reduce production, our friend in Russia has also pumped up production to such high levels. The US has now joined the top world producers of oil, so we are going to lose market share. That's what Saudi Arabia says. So they say, we are not going to reduce production. We are going to continue pumping at a certain high level. Then US and Russia start to compete. No, not US, sorry. Saudi and Russia start to compete. Who pumps out more? And the oil prices continue to crash further. The investment also continues to fall. So by the time we're being hit by COVID in 2020, this just accelerated something that was already happening. You remember the oil prices going down to almost zero. And then as we recover from COVID, we find a world that had stopped investing in finding and producing new oil. That's where we are right now. I was taking you back completely to how we have gotten to up to where we are today. So we find a world which had stopped investing, and demand is increasing, but production is not joining as fast because these projects take long periods of time to mature. And of course now we have, perhaps what now becomes the solution is that we have the energy transition that has come in as a new factor that hasn't been there in those decades. So I think over and above what has already been mentioned is that the transition to the renewable energies is going to cover part of that gap. So we may not go back to investing as much in oil as we have done previously because the financiers are also starting to hold back. But the renewables are coming in now, and I think it has now become clear to everybody that the renewables will occupy a space they were never thought to possibly occupy. I would give you an example of geothermal, which Kenya is blessed in abundance. Geothermal energy, a lot of people have looked at it as just power production energy. So you drill, you get steam, it has to be hot enough at very, very high pressure so that it can come out and be able to run power turbines. But the world is also moving on beyond there, where any heat below the ground surface can now be used. In the US, they're starting to put what they're calling combined cycles. You put some pipes of some light fluid underground, places which have even heat, even if it's just 7 degrees, but you circulate it, and then you use a compressor to extract more heat from it, the same way your fridge works, and you warm the house with that energy. That is something that has just started being done like a few years ago. But if you go now in China, they're not even caring about power generation with geothermal heat. They are using it now directly for so many other purposes. So when you come back here in Kenya, you might see that that is an opportunity we can use. If you drill a well in Maimahio, you just 200 meters, a water well, you get water which is 60, 70 degrees hot. Can you imagine how much you could do with that energy if we started to plan to use it well? So before we go back to the camels, we will probably have all these other potential sources that we can bring in. And I think Kenya is a trailblazer. It's already producing its electricity with over 80% of it is renewable energy right now. And I think that should increase to near 100% at some point. So I think the world will now change in a different way. And that is going to also affect the geopolitics of oil and gas, because if people are not getting it from far distances, then they are going to perhaps change the way they are doing the politics around the oil and gas.
Oh, thank you. I guess we have time for a few more questions. I can take 2 questions? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Nyoike, and I have a question. So I wanted to ask 2 questions, but I think one has been answered by Mr. Mwendia, and was on what basis do we determine the these prices of oil, and I think he has nailed it by the point of demand and supply. You know, my second question is who gets to decide or control these oil prices?
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll take maybe one other question, and then I'll give it to my panelists.
Yes, my name is Rotich. I have a question for the peers. I've been an admirer of Singapore. The fact that Singapore, they're able to refine oil and sell oil without having a drop of oil in their own territory. So I was really hopeful growing up, knowing that we have a refinery in Mombasa, and one day we'll be able to refine all this oil for the African region in Mombasa. And then out of the blue, the refinery was shut. I don't know, was that a strategic move or it was a policy failure?
All right, Issues Refinery. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Ignatius Nyaga Munyiri. I have one question for the peers, please. Now, you said Uganda will soon be producing 230 million barrels per day, and Kenya will only drill 80,000.
230,000.
230,000.
Kenya 230?
No,
Uganda 230. Kenya 80 only. Yeah. So, you know, when someone is very hungry, they would want to see a lot of food near them, so that Kenyans are so poor now, you are sure that they are crying everywhere. Now, if oil is coming to their country, then they would expect more production per day, because that would mean more money. Now, please let them know whether this is a mechanism of demand and supply that will limit them now to producing more, only to eat it. That's one.
Michelle will deal with that one, because that's a reservoir question.
The second question is, there is already a conversation in the country about one sharing, one vote or something like that. This is now in terms of sharing out the proceeds from the oil. What is this ratio that is going to be applied that will now bring equity to everybody? Because this oil is not only basically for Turkana, it's going to be for the whole country, because that drilling or exploration takes the taxpayers' money. So what are you doing to ensure that there is going to be equity in the distribution of this, the proceeds from this oil? The third one is, the technology is now coming up with dry battery cars, which will not need fuel anymore. Is this something going to worry us? Especially because it's one thing to discover this oil, and yet another thing to produce and consume. The time span is going to be too long before this one is coming up. So maybe by the time we now can start to produce, the cars will already have flooded in the market. Is it likely to worry us now? Because our oil is likely to find no market? Please.
All right, thank you so much. And to be honest, I was one of those Kenyans way back. I think I was a reporter at CNBC when the discovery of oil was done. And we're like, finally, like Saudi Arabia, our accounts will be full at the end of the month from the government. I can just sit home and chill. So P.S., we can start with you. The two questions that I think are directed to you directly. That's on the refinery. Mwendia, you'll take the question on who controls the prices globally. Michelle, you'll take the reservoir question on why we have 80,000 and we cannot produce any more. P.S., let's start off with you.
Okay, so the prices in the world are, so there are many ways you can decide how you're going to take your prices, but you want something that's not easily manipulatable. So there's a publication that comes out every day called the Platts publication. And they do, they report, they're just reporters. They say this is what prices were of fuel or crude oil that were achieved in various places in the world. So Northwest Europe, the Mediterranean, the Arab Gulf, Singapore, US Gulf Coast, And you decide which of those quotations you like. And you all agree, we are all going to, because none of us controls that price, we're going to agree this is the price we're going to use. And those are the prices that we use, Platts. On the refinery, don't forget this, as Michelle said, this refinery was built in 1963. And technology overtook us. The world has moved on. It reached a point where we were subsidizing the refinery 2 shillings and 70 cents per liter. And you know Kenyans. If you're subsidizing even 10 cents, they're up in arms. So we ourselves, we as Kenyans, decided we don't want to pay more for this refinery to support whatever was going on. So it's not really I can't say it's a policy failure. Is whoever was there who was investing in the refinery decided not to invest anymore. It's nothing new. South Africa, they've closed 3 of their 4 refineries. Cape Town, the 2 in Durban, they have only 1 left. Refining business is highly intense from a technology point of view, and your market must be able to absorb the cost of the technology. There is the South African refineries, from what I understand, asked the government to add, I think it was 70 South African cents per liter for the improvements. And the government was not prepared to do that, so they cannot, they're a business, don't forget, they're spending money to make money. So they decided not to go down that road. And that's why we closed the refinery. On electric vehicles, I don't see the danger of that happening very soon. Electric vehicles are not big anywhere where there is no government intervention. So in the places where you see electric cars are pervasive is where the government gives you 100% tax write-off on the vehicle. So you buy the car today and you are able to write off that as a tax write-off in your next tax return. In Kenya, because of what I spoke about, conservation and efficiencies, we tried to move the import age from 8 years to 6 years. There was uproar in the market that the government does not want people to own vehicles. So anyway, there are no 8-year-old electric cars, unfortunately, so that's not going to happen soon. And we're not in the process. Like Wendy said, oil and gas is here to stay. We are in a transition. It took us to move from coal to liquid fuels 180 years. That was the transition, and both were operating at the same time. So don't look at transition as something that's going to happen tomorrow. Transition is moving from something to something else. And you have to have all your infrastructure in place. We are still battling with electrification, with moving people from cooking with firewood and charcoal to cleaner fuels. We are still in a transition phase, and most of Africa is in a transition phase. And not only that, not only are we in a transition phase in Kenya, we are far ahead of many people, but our population is the fastest growing on the planet, Africa's population. So 1/3 of all people in the world will be African by 2030. All those people will need to have houses, all those people will have to have transport, they'll all have to have some kind of industrialization taking place. I'll give you just a quick example. The president's Big Four was 100,000 houses. We build 10,000 houses a year in Kenya. So everything in Kenya is for 10,000 houses. Cement, steel, glass, everything is for 10,000 houses. We have to increase our cement production 10 times to meet that aspiration. You cannot make cement on solar. You cannot make cement on wind. You still have to use hydrocarbons. So we are still far. I wouldn't panic too much. The Chinese and the Indians have said they will be net zero in 2070. Net zero, meaning what they burn on fossil fuels and what they produce on renewables will be equal. Not zero. This transition is not to zero, it's to net zero. So we have to consider that that is what we're talking about.
Mundia?
Yeah, you know, at the beginning, the PS gave a statistic about energy, the per capita consumption of us and the people in the OECD countries. And sometimes I think it is not taken into perspective what will happen when that per capita consumption starts to move up in a hockey stick kind of pattern. Because you're talking about 1/3 of the population by 20. You can see lights in so many places that there were no lights at all. So this will continue to increase. The question must be then asked, when this population starts to consume even like 3, 4, 5 times what they are consuming today, how much is that energy and where will it come from? Now, then when you look at oil, you see that oil is portable energy. Portable in that you can put it in a jerry can and move to a distant place. Most of the rest of the energy, until the battery technology reaches a certain level and also stops being so expensive, it will be hard to transfer it from one location to the other. And knowing that you're either carrying it or you are having the infrastructure to transmit it as electricity. And that infrastructure is also still growing. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this to support the point that yes, the world will transition from oil and gas and reduce emissions, but also it is quite unlikely that any person seated in this room today will see the world stop using oil as an energy source. Other people will, perhaps, at some point. But anybody seated in here today may not live to that time when they will see that the world has completely stopped using oil and gas. Now, in regard to the global oil and gas prices, I think I would still just come back to the forces of energy and supply. I know sometimes a few people do sit in certain places and amplify sentiments, which can push up prices or take prices in a different direction. I think Wall Street is famous for doing such things. The others are the press, that they can do that. But none of them can actually cause a sustained movement of global prices in a certain direction. It's only the forces of supply and demand that can do that. However, if people are anticipating that a certain event may happen that will cause a shortage, then I think the world over, because again the geopolitics of oil and gas are directed by, one is energy security, perceived security, that whatever happens anywhere, I will have some energy that I can use. The other one is who has the control of the supply. So if the person who is a bit jittery about security sees something negative happening in the place where the source is, they get very jittery and they can cause wars. We have seen things happen which many people think that was not quite necessary. Whether there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or not is still a question. But you can see those kind of things happening because some people are trying to secure themselves. Now, those events also do affect the supply and demand situation. Or you see the uprising like what happened in 2011 in North Africa. I think it was called the Arab Spring. Yes, you see something like that happening, then that will push up oil prices to a certain level. Otherwise, it's mainly supply and demand, and then events that are seen like they may affect supply and demand. So the prices will start to move in anticipation. That's why when COVID came and people were seeing like they will stop traveling completely, the oil prices like in the US went to zero. And even in Europe almost, but it didn't reach zero. Why? Because if you are holding it as stock, you start now seeing the cost of storing it for a long period of time and how much that will cost you. You are almost willing to give it away, okay, and you don't have to deal with this cost completely. So those kind of things will affect the oil and gas prices globally.
All right, thank you, Mundia. Michelle, on the issue of why is it that Kenya can only produce a maximum of 80,000 barrels a day and not the 230,000 that Uganda can?
You know, Kenyans, they really like to be the ones who are leading in everything, especially in East Africa. They want to be the elites, the ones who are leading. First of all, you know, this hydrocarbon is a natural resource. So it's just underground. We discovered, it's just put there. So it's up to us to discover where is it and how much is there. Now we're gonna go back to, the PS said seismics. These are the geologists, geoscience, geometrics, petrophysics. This is their work. All they do is to go and figure out where do we have oil and how deep do we have it. And then they pass on that information to the drilling engineers. So for geologists, all they discover is like, where is it? Like in Kenya, we discovered 10 fields. We have Amazon, Gamia, Erut, Egete, all these beautiful names. And so from there, they give the information to the drill engineer. The drill engineer drills and compares the actual versus what the geologist has discovered. Then we go back into geology. We talked about faulting, how the tectonic plates move, and then the volcanoes. So you'll figure out that, yes, this is a Ngamia field. We have drilled, we have discovered an oil, but how big is the basin? And that's when we go to the appraisal. How big is the basin? So we start looking at where is the pinching part of the oil and drill it. And sometimes you'll find that it's dry, and that's when you collect now more information to figure out how much hydrocarbons do we have in this particular basin. So you'll find some of them are continuous, and then you'll find some of them are pinching out their compartments. So yes, we do have oil, but it's in a compartment by itself. We have oil this side is a compartment. And then also in different levels. In Kenya, we have 5 levels of oil. In other places, when I was working in Wyoming, it was actually 1 level, but it was a huge layer of oil. So all that information as a reservoir engineer, they put it together and they put a statistics of, in Amazon reservoir, this is how much hydrocarbons we have. In Gamia, so in different fields. Then the next thing is to see how do we produce this field, now as a field combined. How do we produce it? Do we want it to produce for 20 years or 50 years and produce to an optimal? Or do you want to produce it 5 years and produce everything? So that's when you go back to the geologist to figure out how is our subsurface. If we produce faster, are we gonna accumulate all the oil, or are we gonna leave some oil in the field? So you want to make sure that you recover as much as possible. That's the recovering factor. So sometimes you have to produce at a lower rate to make sure that you produce everything from the subsurface. So those are the 2 factors. One is we cannot dispute, it's just by nature. And then the second one now, that's whenever we are the ones who want to make sure that we recover all the hydrocarbons and we have the optimal capacity and production profile to make sure that we make the best out of it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. How are we doing on time, Zedi?
No.
PS wants to add something.
I need to disappear. I need to
You'd like to add something?
Oh, you want to leave?
Okay, the PS needs to leave. Can we take some final comments from my panelists and then we wrap? Yes, please. PS, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, thank you, KCA, for having this talk. It is quite a complex, I was telling the VC and Terian, this is a 1-year course. So we've managed to do it in just a primer, in an hour and something. But as you can imagine, there are so many facets from a policy point of view, to the science, to the market. But first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting us. And I hope it will pique your interest to also think more about what is happening out there and why things are moving the way they move. And you're in a university, so this is where people come to think and learn. So I just want to encourage you to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, PS. Mundia?
Yeah, I echo the gratitude to the university for bringing up this discussion. Especially at a time when, people have, a lot of people have given up on our oil in Turkana, and now the question usually is, are you sure there is anything there or anything like that? So it's good to rejuvenate it. Also at a time when the world is dealing with this transition that we have just talked about, and, which adds a very significant piece into this whole subject of geopolitics. What will the oil producers do, the big ones? We talk about climate change, which is a concern to everybody. In the meantime, US is producing 10 million barrels per day. Saudi is producing 10 million barrels per day, and actually they have no other source of revenue for their country. Russia, before the war, was also producing, I think, almost 12 million barrels per day. What will these people do? I think they're going to start acting in also very interesting ways. Apparently, US now doesn't have to go and protect the Middle East oil anymore, because for now they think they're okay. And they actually think they're the ones who have been stopping the Middle East from blowing up into a ball of flame. They think the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, would not have been operable if they were not protecting it. And yet about 40% of production does pass through there. So what will happen if that protection maybe disappears? Those are some of the questions we can start asking ourselves. If Iran starts fighting with Saudi tomorrow, the world oil supply could be cut by as much as 15%. What would happen if that happens? So we may think today's prices are high, but where are they likely to go at that point? So all these changing dynamics are things we should just keep in our minds, even for economists, really, even for people who think they are not oil professionals. But this is something that will come directed hit how our economies are operating. Otherwise, thank you very much. I'm pleased to have been here today. Okay. It's been an interesting discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Mundia. Michelle?
Thank you so much, KCA, for having a forum like this. I get very passionate when it comes to oil and gas, and for our citizens and youth to learn more about oil and gas. I'll just challenge, you go out there, learn. Google is free. You can't go out there and say you don't have a job, and actually there's a lot of opportunities if you just open your mind to learn. Thank you.
All right, let's put our hands together for our panelists this afternoon. Mr. Andrew Kamau, Principal Secretary, Petroleum and Mining, Wendia Nyaga, Chief Executive Officer, Oil and Energy Services Limited, and CFO, OML Africa Logistics Limited, and of course, Engineer Michelle Boyd, who's a petroleum engineering consultant. Thank you all so much. I'd like to welcome our MC back on stage. I think our panelists can take your other seats on the floor.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very insightful session that we had. So I think I would want to ask us to give one more round of applause to our panelists. We can do better than that as a university. And also, we want to give 4 factorial to our event moderator, Terian Chebet. So as a university, we have our style of doing it. I hope all of us here are conversant with the 4 factorial way of applauding our very important people. So can we start? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I think the next session is very brief. We would want to, as we escort our guests, we want to see if there is something that we can give them, some little thing that we can give them to remember us with. Not a brown envelope, as it is traditionally done in most places in Kenya, but at least something that you will put somewhere in your house or your office, that when you look at it, you'll say, this I got from this great university in the region called KCA University. So at this juncture, I would want to invite the captain, the CEO, the Vice Chancellor, KCA University, Professor Isaiah Wakindiki, to come and give these little tidings to our very honored guests. Can we put our hands together, please? Yeah, so we will just go let's start with the lady. I think ladies first. Michelle, please. Some round of applause, please. Thank you very much. Those were very insightful snippets of knowledge in the matter of oil and gas that you shared with us. Second is our honorable PS. The closest some of us have been to a PS, a sitting PS. So we are really greatly honored. Some round of applause, please. Thank you very much. And next is Bwana Mwendia. Bwana Mwendia, very insightful knowledge. Round of applause, please. And last but not least, oh yes, there is one of our panelists who was meant to be here, but for some reason was not able to make it. In her absence, we still want to honor her because she had actually given us the promise to be part of this. I don't know whom I'm going to call. Since she's a lady, I would want to call back Michelle to receive this on her behalf. So could we give a round of applause in absentia, please, as we award this? For the record, that is for the record. And finally, something for our lady queen in the media. We have watched you a lot on the TV screens, but this has been an opportune moment for us to brush shoulders with you physically. We really appreciate it. So, round of applause, please. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think that is it for the gifts. So lastly, because I can see time is so much spent and a lot of you have some engagements elsewhere, I think the remaining part here is just to invite DVC Finance Planning and Development, Professor Damien Manono, to come and move a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony, or the event mover of the day, for work well done. Ladies and gentlemen, my work is very easy, to pass a vote of thanks, and I'm going to do that faithfully and in a very short while. And first of all, I want to appreciate the fact that issues of gas and oil are very critical. And as the panelists of today asserted, they are very complex. And the reason why I say they are very critical is because you find everyone from informed and uninformed position discuss issues to do with gas and oil everywhere, even in the market. So that is how complex and critical it is. Nonetheless, I want to appreciate the panelists of today. Mr. Andrew Kamau, the PS, Petroleum and Mining, Mr. Mwendia Nyaga, Engineer Michelle Boyd, and our moderator, Terian Chebet, first for creating time to come here and to engage with us in this very important discussion. Thank you very, very much. And also, we want to appreciate the challenges you've thrown to each one of us who are listening to you, particularly on issues to do with job opportunities in this particular sector, gender issues, issues to do with the missing link, the geopolitics, and many others. We appreciate all that. And thank you so much. So can we put our hands together for our panelists today? For the KCA family, led by our VC and CEO, Professor Isaiah Kindigi, and DVC Academic and Student Affairs, and University Management Board members present, deans, directors, students, staff, our alumni, and all those who have listened to our today's discussion. We thank you so much. And without a lot of taking a lot of my time, just to request each one of us to put our hands together to appreciate all of us. So let us put our hands together to appreciate each one of us for participating in this. And we look forward to further engagement on the same, because I know if it wasn't a matter of time limit, the questions will be so many. So we look forward to the same engagement into the future. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening.
Round of applause again to our DVC. Thank you very much. So I think we have come to the end of the event. And before I invite Dr. Simon Mwendia to give us the closing prayers, just want to say my name is Makredo Chieng. I'm a member of the faculty, KC University School of Business, and I've been your MC. My wish is that in the future we have another event, not very far from this, but that which is going to handle the issue of transition to green energy. We have dealt a lot in oil and gas, but the world is moving to clean energy. There's a difference between clean energy and green energy. Yeah, so maybe if it's going to be something that as a university we are going to see the need to address, this would be something that we'd want to participate in, because some organization called the International Energy Association has predicted that by the year 2050, we are going to attain 50% net zero the whole world over. So as a country, we need to start thinking in that line and see what we can do. So I think to that end, I would want to invite Dr. Simon Mwendia, the Dean School of Technology, to come and give us a closing prayer. So may I ask that we are all upstanding as we get that closing prayer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our MC. All protocols observed. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so I've been invited to come and lead with a word of prayer. So let us bow our heads and pray. Almighty God, we started this meeting with you, and we are closing it with you. Thank you for making this meeting a success. We would have not done it without you, because many of us have our own plans, but it is with you. But Lord, we have made it. We thank you for establishing our plans. Thank you for inspiring us with ideas that have been shared in this meeting. May the things we have learned today stir our heart, and may we put them into action. As we live, we pray that you protect our lives and continue to guide us with your wisdom. And it is in Jesus' name we pray, believing. Amen. Thank you. God bless you.
Praise God. I welcome the praise and worship. One of us is somewhere. Oh, yeah. First of all, yeah. Today we are going to praise God differently as we let the songs minister to us as we sing together with the songs. Amen? Yeah, so I just invite